started since we have a quick, short time together. Welcome. Again, this session is focused on reimagining the transitions between secondary and post-secondary education. My name is Cuevas. I'm an associate director at JFF for Jobs for the Future. I want to first thank the Pathways to Adult Success team for inviting JFF to be here. You'll hear first from our organization about our Big Blur vision, and then you'll hear from our partners and colleagues at the Educational Equity Lab following this. So I'm joined by my colleague Meredith Hills to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Meredith Hills. I'm Senior Policy Manager at Jobs for the Future, working with state and federal policy and on the Big Blur, which we'll explain in a minute.
Thanks, Meredith. And both Meredith and I work on our policy advocacy team at JFF, and we're also a part of our Big Blur team at our organization as well. So let's see. So today, first, before I get into the Big Blur, I want to give an overview of JFF a bit, but we're going to be talking about JFF's big vision that we put out in the fall called the Big Blur. It's focused on erasing the boundaries between high school, college, and careers, and creating an entirely new system that works for everyone. So before digging in there, I just want to talk a little bit about our organization. JFF is a national nonprofit organization. We've been around for nearly 40 years. We work all across the nation in almost every state. And we partner with a variety of folks in the field to do our work. And our focus is around transforming our nation's education and workforce systems to best serve today's learners, students, and workers. So we have three core focus areas. One is around helping people advance, helping and ensuring all students and workers have the skills and credentials that they need to access good jobs, so impact on people. We focus on building regional economies, inclusive regional economies, so we have an impact on places. Some of our programmatic work is in specific communities and places. And then our third key priority is around redesigning our nation's education and workforce development systems. So very systems focused, again, ensuring that those systems best serve our learners, students, and our workers. So before digging into, I do want to just gauge who's in the room really quick. So if folks could just raise your hand if you're coming from one of these sectors, I think that would be helpful for us as presenters. So if you're coming from K-12 or you're representing a school district or a school or a teacher, can you raise your hand? Great. If you're coming from higher education, post-secondary, college, could you raise your hand? Folks coming from community-based organizations, nonprofits, advocacy organizations, anyone from employers or workforce? Okay. Any sector or group that I missed? Foundations, philanthropy? Okay. Well, hopefully that covers the bulk of who's here, but that's just a good sense for us to see who's with us today. All right. So about the Big Blur, again, last fall JFF put out this new vision of the Big Blur. It is focused on creating new institutions that support, the Big Blur is focused on creating new institutions that support 16 to 20-year-olds or grades 11 through 14. These would be entirely new institutions. They would not be high schools, nor would they be community colleges, but entirely new configurations and focused on better serving the needs of today's students. Some key features of Big Blur institutions would be that they would be free for all students. They would include guided pathways models or sequenced courses so students know where they're going and where they're headed. There would be an integrated work-based learning component that involves employers, that is connected to regional industries and in-demand and local employment. There would be robust academic and career advising, and there would be robust wraparound supports. So the focus of the Big Blur is really about rethinking the way in which we talk about and connect high school, post-secondary, and the labor market. And the reason why JFF put out this vision for the Big Blur is because we have a long history of working in this space, and helping smooth the transitions between secondary and post-secondary. And there has been a lot of work in the field to date, and the Big Blur really does build upon current proof points, best practices out there. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We know, and we believe that, the field has been moving and trending in this direction for some time. So for example, we've been trying to improve transitions for a long time. If we think about improving transitions between high school and post-secondary, a lot has already been done in the early college space. In the dual enrollment space, we've seen those programs expand. We've seen some of these grade 13 programs expand. We've seen an increase in college promise, so making college and post-secondary more affordable for all young people, improvement and a focus on college advising. So we're seeing some blurring already happening in this space. When we think about high school to connecting to jobs and careers, focus on career pathways, focus on career and technical education, as that being a key priority. How do we improve those programs? Increase in work-based learning and career navigation. So the Big Blur is really building from where we're seeing the field headed. And however, we've become increasingly impatient at our organization. We think more needs to be done quicker because although we have seen improvements, we still know when we look at certain statistics such as post-secondary completion rates, there's still a lot of disparities there. And there's still a lot of gaps between who's actually completing post-secondary versus not. And so we really think the Big Blur is pushing the bounds and really saying, hey, let's rethink the systems altogether. So I will pass it to Meredith to talk a little bit more about the key features of the Big Blur.
Thanks, Erica. So as Erica mentioned, I'm now going to spend a minute to talk about the 4 components that are part of the Big Blur. And in the ideal scenario, once the Big Blur vision per se is really realized, it means that all 4 of these components will be happening. But I encourage you as you listen to this to think about where your work falls into these different pockets, where barriers are in your state in different areas of this, and also where you can kind of find get your foot in the door in some of this work. So the first piece is incentives, and this means incentives that promote new ways of organizing learning and supports across grades 11 to 14. And there are 2 parts that go into this. One is accountability, so this means defined outcome metrics, and really the goal is a state accountability system that has common metrics of success for students in grades 11 to 14. And then the second part of incentives is funding, so graded funding streams. And this would really look like any state and federal funding that supports students from grades 11 to 14, or any new funding that doesn't exist yet, fingers crossed, is pooled by folks to really support coherent grade 11 to 14 experiences. And of course, that would be really beneficial to students, and support affordability and accessibility. And on the other side, really cost effective because staffing and administrative costs between institutions and districts would be shared. The second is alignment, and this is really all about systems alignment, so that when students reach the 11th grade, they enter essentially this new institutional structure that Erica mentioned, that incorporates high school and college programs and prepares the students for a really successful career, as well as continued education. Third is governance. This would look like a state cabinet level team or empowered secretary or commissioner, and they have the decision-making authority and oversees, ensures funding for, and supports unified grade 11 through 14 structures. They would also ensure, they meaning the individual or the full team, would ensure that the state's economic development strategies and workforce development strategies and educational strategies are really all aligned and cohesive. And then fourth is staffing, and we're going to get into staffing a little bit later when we have time for a full discussion. But the goal here is that staffing structures are designed to equip specially trained educators and educational leaders to teach, as well as curate and organizing learning and work experiences so that students are fully supported. And This would mean not just cohesive and shared staffing between secondary and post-secondary in that 11 to 14 range, so that teacher certification and training is all aligned between the two and possibly shared, but also that educators and leaders are fully equipped to guide students through their academic and workplace goals, and they also understand how to work with employers, how to work with community partners, how to work with intermediaries, and how transfer and articulation systems work. Although a fully transformed new BLUR system doesn't really exist yet, there are a lot of examples that show different facets of blurring. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these, and a lot of these examples, different pieces of them are happening in other states as well, so they might start to sound familiar. So one thing that happened in Washington State was they utilized their state legislature, and in 2019 they passed a bill that meant eligible students were automatically enrolled into that next level of academics. This took the burden off of the students and was able to support them in their continued academic and career goals. Next is Tennessee's Ready Graduate Indicator data. This data factors into the state's early post-secondary opportunity framework as an indicator of school quality and student success, or the SQSS metric. And in addition, Tennessee has districts develop a robust portfolio of early post-secondary opportunities, or EPSOs, that ensure college credit and technical credentials are all accessible to all high school students. And the framework includes a range of opportunities to accommodate a range of interests and really meet the needs of the students where they're at. They also provide incentives for districts, really through state subsidies, which we know are a necessity. So this covers test fees, course materials, as well as professional development. Next is the idea of a 13th year. Grade 13 programs could really appeal to a lot of states who are interested in streamlined and coordinated secondary to post-secondary pathways, because they offer that financial mechanism, which is oftentimes one of the biggest barriers to setting up dual enrollment in college and high school programs. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next. So I think one of the key things is all of us here know the importance and value of having aligned and collaborative secondary to post-secondary to workforce systems. But we really need the acknowledgement that post-secondary and higher ed is not just a public good, but a public responsibility. And one thing that we've been talking about when thinking how to communicate this message is really emphasizing and kind of pushing for that broader mindset shift. So what does the road ahead look like? We have a huge opportunity right now because we're finding that there's a lot of support for this big BLUR idea from policymakers at the state and local levels. A lot of folks are doing different pieces of this work and are also on their own looking at these like BLUR ideas, even if they weren't necessarily labeling them as that. So right now we're working on a state policy framework. It's informed by a handful of states who have gone through the different policy barriers as well as policy opportunities and helped us create essentially this matrix of the different pieces of the BLUR. And if you look at a checklist of what are the policy conditions we need to achieve to get to the fully blurred vision, like here's the steps you can take, and here's what the different phases might look like. So that's something we're working on now and excited to share out, and really looking forward to getting continued input and hearing from all of you about what you're doing, what you're trying to do, what's working, what's not working, everything across the board. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, to share any of your practices, and I think we'll all come back to a group conversation in a little bit, but in the meantime, I'm going to hand it over to Shaq and Ashley.